Explorations. Until very recently, to have any chance of making it into space, you had to be an employee of either the American or Russian space programs. But then in the late 90s, a new term was born: space tourism. This type of travel attracted the sort of people who have got bored of flying first class and staying in the world's top hotels. Space tourism really is a billionaire boy's toy.
I've been inspired by spaceflight as long as I can remember. As long as I've known that that was the frontier of exploration of the universe, I've wanted to be part of that adventure. And it's been a dream come true to come here.
Internet billionaire Mark Shuttleworth became the second ever space tourist when he paid $20 million to the Russian government. In return for his hard-earned cash, they gave him a lift on the Russian Soyuz craft to the International Space Station, where he enjoyed an 8-day space holiday. Apart from the expense, one of the biggest problems with this form of space tourism is the intensive training. The preparation includes being spun around on the world's largest centrifuge to prepare you for the G-forces felt on liftoff. Slightly more fun, but potentially nauseating, is the infamous Vomit Comet, a converted freight plane that dives so steeply it briefly counteracts the effects of gravity.
There are a couple of critical tasks that they like to know that you've done at least in weightlessness before, such as rapidly putting on your spacesuit if there's an emergency depressurization. To come here and be part of a physical training regime, just like any one of the cosmonauts, that was extremely tough.
Not everybody can afford $20 million to buy a ticket into space, but one billionaire's toy might bring space tourism into the financial reach of everybody.
You can hardly describe someone as a tourist when they have to go through 6 months training. What we're trying to create is real private space tourism in the true sense of the word. And we will design it with the customer in mind and with the experience in mind, and giving them the best experience in space they could possibly get in their 5 minutes of weightlessness and 25-30 minutes that they'll actually have in space.
Virgin Galactic is possible thanks to the technology that was developed to win a competition called the X Prize. $10 million was offered to the first non-governmental group to fly a spacecraft to an altitude of 100 kilometers just outside of the Earth's atmosphere. 27 teams from around the world chased the prize, including Russian-based group Space Adventures.
C-21 is the Russian-built suborbital vehicle. It's a rocket vehicle that will take a crew of 3, a pilot and 2 passengers, up to above 100 kilometers above the Earth's surface, onto the edge, threshold of space.
Most of the teams chasing the prize opted to use a technique where a spacecraft would piggyback a traditional plane before detaching at a set height and then using a rocket engine to reach the edge of space. One team, Spaceship 1, had a slight advantage over the others, the backing of one of the world's richest men, Microsoft billionaire Paul Allen. Because what's better than being a mere space tourist? Owning your very own spaceship. March 2004, and Spaceship 1 pilot Mike Melville is about to attempt to be the first commercial astronaut.
I am ready to go, and we are going to win the X Prize. Put your money on it.
Spaceship 1 gets a lift off its carrier aircraft White Knight. It's then released and rockets straight up to space with a unique engine which uses rubber as the fuel and nitrous oxide as the accelerant. Heat generated during re-entry to the atmosphere is one of the greatest dangers for traditional spacecraft. Spaceship 1, however, was designed to overcome this problem. Its wings fold up or feather, so its aerodynamics are changed before re-entry.
Bert Rutan describes it as a shuttlecock as it comes down through the atmosphere and slows it down. So basically what Bert does is he changes the shape of Spaceship 1 into a shuttlecock stroke sycamore leaf design so that it floats back into the atmosphere. And it re-feathers into a glider, as it's now become, instead of a spaceship. And it takes about 25 minutes to glide back down to Earth as a glider.
Spaceflight 1 succeeds in reaching space. Paul Allen and his team beat the competition to the X Prize and take home the $10 million purse when Mike Melville becomes the first owner of FAA commercial astronaut wings.
I think the pioneers on Virgin Galactic flights will pay about $200,000, which is just over £100,000. Which of course is a hugely reduced cost from the kind of trip that we were talking about that, say, a Mark Shuttleworth would have taken a few years ago, or Dennis Tito, who had to pay up to $20 million to go.
While some are satisfied merely to fulfill their dreams of exploring space, one billionaire is laying the groundwork for mankind to realize the fantasy of one day settling there. When reclusive billionaire Ed Bass decided he wanted to see how humans might survive on the surface of other planets, he paid for this huge glass house to be built in the Arizona desert. With a total price tag of $200 million, it really is a toy that only a billionaire could afford.
If we're going to live in space, we need to learn to regenerate the air, water, and produce food. So Biosphere 2, of course, was a bit of a visionary look at what a large system would eventually look like in space or on a planetary surface.
Biosphere 2 was a huge laboratory for ecological study. It had two functions. We were looking at living and life support inside closed systems, but we were also looking at this huge ecological study to try and come to a better understanding of our planet, our biosphere, and how it works.
The fact that Ed Bass stamped up the cash rather than the government or a university had a number of benefits.
To have a private investor in something like that gave us an awful lot of freedom. It meant that we could do things fast, we could act fast, we could get that whole thing designed, built, developed, and lived in for 2 years in the space of 10 years.
At $200 million, Biosphere 2 might have been expensive, but you get a lot for your money. It covers over 12,000 square meters. It was completely sealed off from the outside world, giving it its own environmental systems, which had to be completely self-sustaining.
After pondering what we should call the system, someone came up with the idea of Biosphere 2. And of course, that always leads to the question, well, where's Biosphere 1? Is it something that you built? Now, Biosphere 1 is the Earth's biosphere.
The Biosphere housed 8 Biospherians, as they called themselves, for 2 years, completely sealed off from the outside world.
It was a great adventure. Nobody knew at all whether, in fact, we could survive for 2 years inside Biosphere 2.
When we finally walked in there and shut the airlock door behind us, it was like, oh, we made it, we did it. And it was, it was a wonderful feeling, actually. And there we were standing there. We had our little world in front of us to work and look after and take care of for the next 2 years. An ecstatic feeling.
However, not everything went perfectly to plan.
Nobody had predicted that oxygen might begin declining in the atmosphere of Biosphere 2. Nobody.
The Earth's atmosphere is made up of 78% nitrogen, 21% oxygen, and 1% of other gases, and the atmosphere inside the biosphere was supposed to replicate this. But the scientists monitoring the air inside noticed that the oxygen levels were falling.
If you have open concrete in an area where you have very high carbon dioxide levels, the concrete will actually slowly sequester your oxygen. And we found ourselves having very, very slowly reducing oxygen levels during our 2-year stay.
So we decided that the maximum of science would be to slowly let that go and then make detailed physiological measurements of humans. And what was learned by that was that 14.2% people were still healthy, except the oldest guy in there, it wasn't quite as decisive in his step. So we said, okay, that's it, even though the physiological data was good.
The oxygen within the biosphere had to be supplemented for the health of those inside.
That was not a failure. That was incredible success. The fact that we had shown such a small, steady month-by-month decline in oxygen had demonstrated that, in fact, we had done world-class engineering to make the biosphere sealed. The human challenge is not to be underestimated. I mean, people have said that, Biosphere 2 is sort of an ultimate case study of cabin fever.
The Biospherians had to face a problem likely to trouble people colonizing other planets, namely being trapped with a crew of strangers and away from home.
Friends came to the glass, and you know, the Biospherian handshake was putting your hand up against the glass and having someone match it. We'd wake up one winter morning and there'd be a fresh layer of snow on the outside, and all of our friends and the visitors to the project would be bundled up in long johns and ski jackets and whatnot, and there we are in tropical environment looking out on them. Wonderful juxtapositions.
For the scientists involved, Biosphere 2 has been an illuminating experience.
What most people got from Biosphere 2 was not the science or the technology, but just simply an image, a metaphor that people, technology, and the environment can live together. It was a very hopeful and is a very hopeful message.
The Biospherians have no doubts over whether they would repeat the experience.
I would have stayed longer inside Biosphere 2. I would have been very happy to do that. Our little farm was only just getting going after 2 years. You know, I'd have been quite happy to stay in and carry on looking after it for a much longer time.
I'd be willing to go back in. We had learned so much. It had been such an amazing personal, voyage of discovery.
If someone built me a biosphere on Mars tomorrow, I'd go straight to it. I'd be living on it immediately. I'm convinced that it's going to be possible for people to go and live on the surface of other planets and sustain themselves, feed themselves, have their own little farms and be very independent and be able to live very long term.